In this land of stark contrasts, of both astounding natural beauty and extreme poverty, of both deep religious faith and near runaway crime and violence, there has been one constant over the last 35 years. The presence of the missionaries, the priests and nuns and lay people from the Catholic Diocese of Cleveland.
To come here and to see the commitment by our neighbors who live in our community, it just gives you an overwhelming sense of pride, more than most of the things that we go through every day.
These were all donated.
All donated to it.
From Cleveland, Ohio.
A few days ago, Mayor Michael White, prominent businessman Sam Miller, and a small delegation from Cleveland traveled with us to El Salvador to visit the mission team at work in this, one of the most impoverished nations in the Western Hemisphere. Cleveland missionaries have accomplished much here in El Salvador over 35 years. They have also made many sacrifices. But the need in this country continues to grow day by day. And that is something Mayor White, Sam Miller, and the others from Cleveland had to see for themselves.
We're standing at a place that is on the one hand very, very far from Cleveland, but on the other hand, physically it's closer than LA. And that we ought to not just have Catholic nuns and priests here working, but we ought to find ways to outstretch our own hands and our own arms to help people who can't help themselves. 7 days a week, the market is...
Those priests and nuns and lay people, more than 60 over the years, who persevered through war, murder, and repression, were receiving their first ever visit from a Cleveland mayor.
It looks good. Is it good? Bueno or mal?
For Sam Miller, co-chairman of Four City Enterprises, it was a return trip. One of his stops, the medical clinic, whose laboratory was built with money he raised.
Well, I've always felt that those of us that are more fortunate than others should share. And I've also found that wherever I shared, I wound up with much more all over again to share. So it's an unceasing syndrome for me.
For both Miller and Mayor White, coming face to face with these people who possess spiritual wealth in the midst of extreme material poverty was a moving and conflicting experience.
These people every single day, they have challenges which you or I couldn't even fathom. Not where I'm going to be sitting in a theater to see a movie, but whether my children are going to get an education, whether I'm going to live through the day.
Auxilia con tu gracia todos los enfermos.
Ministering to these people's spiritual and social needs has been the mission of the Cleveland Diocese for 35 years. The newfound interest from Cleveland business and government puts the missionaries' struggles and sacrifices in a whole new light.
You know, we've never had anyone come and visit us from the business community or from the government of Cleveland. We felt honored to have them here. We felt humbled to have them here and to have them so interested in our work and in the situation, the conditions of our people.
Keep taking.
Miller hopes to bring a larger delegation of up to a dozen Cleveland businessmen to El Salvador next year.
I really feel that their coming down here will help these people, but much more important, will make better people out of them who are coming down here.
Cleveland is very blessed. We ought to be giving something back, and I've learned a lot today about ways in which we can do that.
Today, it is a peaceful, prayerful place. The very spot where on December 2nd, 1980, Cleveland Catholic missionaries, Sister Dorothy Kazel and Jean Donovan, sacrificed their lives. The kidnapping, rape, and murder of Jean and Sister Dorothy and two Maryknoll nuns, a brutal and agonizing event, has, 18 years later, become a source of faith and resolve and inspiration. On this day, dozens of people who knew Dorothy and Jean and sisters Maura Clark and Etta Ford, or know of them and their sacrifice, gather at the chapel built on the site to remember. Among them, Cleveland's Mayor Michael White and members of Cleveland's current mission team to El Salvador.
But this was the area where they were originally buried, on the night of December the 2nd.
Every year they come back to honor.
Every year we're back here. It's a real special site for us.
The Clevelanders are joined by Salvadorans, some of whom worked alongside the murdered churchwomen to celebrate a memorial mass. Life is not to be conserved, Cleveland missionary priest Bill Thaden instructs. It is to be spent, and if necessary, to be given up in service of others. Look to our martyred sisters, he says. They died to live. Their deaths brought much life.
Dorothy and Jean have given me a testimony of faith, of unity and sanctity. I consider them martyrs who are worthy of sainthood.
Even as the murdered women were being remembered, the work of the Cleveland mission team was continuing in other areas all across El Salvador, in places like Chirilagua, La Libertad, and in this tiny village in the parish of Teotepeque.
I'm just a big ham.
Here, Father John King of Akron runs the diocese's first new mission outpost in 25 years. He is one of a new generation of Cleveland missionaries, drawing their inspiration directly from the martyrs who came before them, from the sacrifices memorialized today.
They taught us to respect the culture. They taught us to sacrifice of ourselves. They told us not to be afraid, to move ahead, to proclaim the gospel. I knew that was something that I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to do something significant like that.
¿Quién se amaba? La hija del equipo misionero de Cleveland, servidora de Dios, entregada al pueblo salvadoreño.
Dick Russ, Fox 8 News, El Salvador.
Come with me in a real truck, I'll show you a mission truck.
Father John King is indeed a man on a mission. The Akron native has just been placed in charge of the Cleveland Catholic Diocese's first new mission outpost in over 25 years.
El Señor lo levantará. Si ha cometido pecados, le serán perdonados.
It is a remote, desperately poor, yet magnificently beautiful place called Teotepeque, the Mountain of God.
I have found so much happiness in the poorest of the poor, and I become more and more convinced every day that the more I can give, the more happy I'll be. I think what we're doing as a mission in El Salvador is to say, how can we make these people's lives better? How can we...
On a recent visit back to Akron, Father John shared his story with students at his old grade school, St. Matthew's, and at the family home in Ellet, got his parents caught up on his latest challenges as a missionary.
John recently has been able to tell me a lot of dangerous things that he does, like crossing that plank bridge over that torrential stream.
The dangers in what John King calls the most violent country in the world go far beyond the terrain. They include his work to turn El Salvador's young people away from street gangs, one at a time.
When I met Ludwig, he was heavy into gangs and drugs and drinking.
But today, Ludwig, the 23-year-old former drug-dealing gangbanger, is Father John King's chief assistant at the main chapel in Teotepeque.
Antes no tenía como una meta.
Before, I just wandered aimlessly without any sense of direction, but now I have a reason for living. I have a goal to keep.
Padre Juan's zeal to keep the faith burning in his mission has him performing mass weddings for those who put off the sacrament for years or decades. He has to order wedding rings in bulk. It has him building and renovating in many of his parish's 28 mountain villages. And above all, it has Father John King trying to tend to each and every one of the thousands of souls in his vast mission territory, the place the natives call the Mountain of God.
We're touching the wounded Christ and the poorest of the poor, and it makes you believe. You have to believe in the gospel. You have to believe that there's a better way out of this.
Dick Russ, Fox 8 News, Teotepeque, El Salvador. The name of this place means the city of sadness. Today, Chilangera, El Salvador is a devastated city of inconsolable grief. Thousands of homeless in this village, served by missionaries of the Cleveland Catholic Diocese, struggle for survival. They are refugees, victims of Hurricane Mitch. The night the storm began its assault on Central America, the villagers of Chilangera would have their faith severely tested by the menace that would pour from the mountains which ring their homes. When Hurricane Mitch hit in the middle of that night, 5 feet of water came rushing off the mountain, and with the water came huge trees and boulders. And this is what they did to the village of Chilangera. With 2/3 of the village about to be destroyed, a miracle happened, testifies Francisco Romero. His house and life were spared when 2 of the giant trees hurtling off the mountain landed right across his gate and diverted the water.
My wife and I began to pray and saw a light which we thought was the Holy Spirit. Several neighbors followed the light into my house, and we all began to pray. All the people who were led here by the Holy Spirit survived, because this was like an oasis in the floodwater.
By morning, most of Chilangera, including all the houses surrounding Francisco Romero's, was washed away by 12 feet of mud.
The stench was what first struck me. As we were leaving San Pedro, you could begin to smell the stench from all the dead bodies. This has been a very difficult time for us. Our catechists have been swept away by this, some of our most committed people. The president of the Legion of Mary was swept away by this.
More than 100 bodies were recovered. Many more may never be found. Today, Cleveland missionaries are helping direct international aid into the city of sadness. Francisco Romero and his neighbors are lending a hand. The hurricane may have crushed their village, but not their spirits. They begin what may be the most difficult year of their lives, having seen the light and keeping the faith. Dick Russ, Fox 8 News, Chilangera, El Salvador.